modelers had been asking over and over again, so it's nice to see that Bachmann have obliged with this elusive version of the Class 45. A big hello to you. It's really great to see you. I hope you're well, and welcome back up here to the Loft on Weir Yard with me, Jennifer Kirk. Now today we're going to be looking at a classic model, and it's one which has been in the Bachmann catalogue for quite some time, but they've recently re-released it as some of the regional specials, and it is of course the Class 45 Peak. But it does have a twist. This is the first time that I'm aware of that it's been in the main range with the flat-fronted noses. Now, they did do it as a special version for Model Zone, and that tells you how long ago that was. But this is the first time we've seen it here in the main range, and I'm really looking forward to taking a look at these. I had an opportunity to purchase one of these, and I thought, well, I've already got the 45-1, the 44 and the 46, so I might as well have the 45-0 as well and get the full quartet. And it's really interesting to see that Bachmann have incorporated a lot of scope to be able to do all of the detail variants between different members of the class, and it'll be really interesting to see just how well this package comes together. We've also got an affiliate link down below that takes you to where you too can pick up your own version of these models if you really like what you see in today's video. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts, and we've got a link to Tramfabrique, one of their UK stockists, in the description box down below that will help you out with the correct decoder to fit into this locomotive, and we're going to be doing a full DCC fitting guide towards the latter quarter of this video. So if that's what you've come for, then just fast forward through and we give you the full lowdown step by step on how to easily DCC fit this locomotive yourself. Additional support comes from TMC, the Model Centre. Check them out at the URL link in the description down below for a fully stocked and comprehensive website that covers products from a whole host of different manufacturers. So without further ado, let's take a close look at this 45 from Bachmann, and does it live up to expectations? Let's find out. Tops classes 44, 45 and 46 were outwardly quite similar to each other and collectively known as the Peaks, given that the Class 44 were all named after particular mountain peaks around the UK, and that nickname stuck, even though the classes 45 and 46 were either unnamed or carried completely different themes of names. The Class 46 was the final evolution of this peak design, and indeed went on to form the basis for the experience to create the Class 47. Now, Bachmann has had models out in its range for a very long time that cover each of these tops classes, and recently they've done some area exclusives, which are basically a model that's only distributed to shops in a particular geographical location, and they've chosen the Class 45 for two of these, and I thought this was an excellent opportunity to pick up this newer version of the model and just see how it differs from previous releases. The one I've chosen to get is 32-686NF, and that's the 45-0 as number 45046 Royal Fusilier in BR Blue. And you can see on the end there as well that this comes with a 21-pin DCC socket, and later on in this video I'm going to be showing you exactly how to DCC fit this model using the Trainomatic 21-pin decoder that I've obtained from Tramfabrique, and we've got a link in the description box to help you out to get exactly the right decoder for this job. Previous releases of these, well, I've got 45120, and it'll be interesting to compare this and just see what detail differences Bachmann have on the 45-0. Over their lifespan, there were a number of differences, plus the subclass of 45-1, so it'll be interesting to see just what differences Bachmann have made allowances in the tooling for. Outwardly, you can see that the class 44 and the class 46 do look rather similar, although the similarity is only skin deep, as the prototypes had enough differences between them for them to be allocated completely different TOPS classes. Putting the previous models to one side, let's take a look inside the box. It's a pretty standard Bachmann packaging, and on the back we've got a brief history of the class, and it just sets out when they were introduced and where their fields of operation were, plus the withdrawals beginning in 1977 and complete 11 years later in 1988, although the class was popular amongst enthusiasts, and that ensured that 12 locomotives survive in preservation. It is interesting to note that technically one of these Class 45s did last through into EWS ownership, although it was dumped and in a demic state at the time and really would never have been able to have run under its own power. It was stopped with a seized traction motor and really did deteriorate massively whilst just dumped in the Toten training compound. The box is a standard Bachmann with the outer slipcase, which we'll just slide that off and then tip the insides out. There is a little bit of paperwork in here, and that includes some detailed instructions, not just on how the model goes together in its entirety, but also some spare parts if you need to order any of these, and how to fit the speaker enclosure if you choose to go for an aftermarket sound installation rather than the factory fitted. It's also a helpful guide for when we come to do the DCC fitting. In the rest of the packaging, you can see here that we've actually got quite a comprehensive collection of extra parts. This includes detailing for the buffer beam and that speaker enclosure if you go that aftermarket route on a sound installation. We've also got a full set of etched nameplates and the crests as well, but you will also see that those do come printed on the side of the model. So these are here as an extra for the modeler that just wants to go that extra step further, and it means you don't need to purchase any aftermarket crests and nameplates. Inside the clamshell packaging, the locomotive's pretty easy to lift out, and we can see here instantly it really is a great looking locomotive, although the Bachmann models do suffer somewhat with this excessive daylight beneath the cab to the bogie, but it's not really clear just how they could do anything about that. Such are the limitations of what a model locomotive is expected to do. The buffers and the drawbar gear are, as per the prototype, mounted on the bogies rather than the body shell, and it's a particularly different type of bogie that the Peaks had, with this one one wheel arrangement, and that effectively means we've got this extra idler gear here just to take some of the weight of the locomotive. It was just somewhat too heavy to be a Coco design, and it would have meant that the axle loadings would have been unduly excessive. The traction motors are acting on these 3 axles on each bogies, with this just an idler. These bogies were pretty much indestructible on the prototype, so much so that a number were converted to propelled snow ploughs after the locomotives were withdrawn, with the plough fitted to the front, this bogie being removed, and draw gear put to the back, and Hattons have actually produced a very credible model of this that we've reviewed on the channel in the past. It's quite clear from the model that this is older tooling, although it was good tooling in its day nonetheless, and still does appear to hold its own. One thing of note is that these models have this kind of smooth front to them, which is something which hadn't appeared before in the main range, other than a one-off special edition for Model Zone. It's certainly something that modelers had been asking over and over again for, so it's nice to see that Bachmann have obliged with this elusive version of the Class 45. If I take my other 45 here, you can see the difference on that front end design, and certainly it is very different, almost utilitarian by comparison, with that smooth front and just the 4 marker lights in place there, with none of that extra busyness that this 45 has. It's really good to see when a manufacturer takes the effort to tool up 4 major detail differences between members of the same class. The plain black bogies are entirely prototypical, although it does hide a lot of the detail that would otherwise be very visible if it were painted another colour like that red. The buffers are sprung, which is quite nice actually for a model that has this kind of vintage, and they are turned metal heads. The coupling itself is a slimline tension lock, which is mounted in this unmoving NEM pocket. It does mean we don't have any lateral play, but the full bogie itself does have a great degree of movement, and when I've had this running, it's shown no signs of any issues in this arrangement. The sides of the bogies capture this utilitarian slab-sided look really well, although all of the detail on this is moulded on with the exception of the speedometer cable and the ladder there to get up to the cab. Everything else appears to be part of the same moulding, and there's no sign of any brake blocks visible at all. The wheels themselves are mounted inboard, and it's interesting to note that the model retains its 4-wheel drive with this final set of wheels on each bogie being free to rotate and not powered from the gear chain. One thing of interest is that it appears that the pickups on this locomotive are only these 2 axles and these 2 axles. It surprises me a little bit that there's no additional pickups to these idlers. However, it remains to be seen whether this affects performance at all when we run it on the track. Certainly my experience of previous versions of the Peaks are that it doesn't really need extra pickups, and as long as you make sure that they are touching the wheel backs, you should get no problems whatsoever. This front bogie here is a separate assembly held by a single screw and has a greater deal of lateral movement, and this aids the model in getting around tighter curves. Underframe detail is fairly limited, although unless you've got the locomotive upside down, it isn't really something that you're particularly going to see. I do like some of the detailing on the central battery boxes, and I'm just interested to note how different that is from previous versions. It would seem that Bachmann have a number of different tooling slides on these models, and when we look across the Class 44 and the Class 46, it's clear to me that what we've got here is the bottom detailing box more akin to the Class 46 than the previous release of the Class 45. Bodyside detail is in the main moulded on, but actually it is quite credibly done. If we look to the front here, these grills completely moulded, there's no etched detail, but actually it works really well. The rivet detail around it though does look a little bit on the over-large side and has been affected by a layer of paint that seems to have pooled up against those rivets, further accentuating their look and size. Handrails on this model feel like they're metal. Picked out in white, they really do look good, and this is an area where I have to say it is a massive improvement from previous releases of this model, which have metal handrails as well, but just in that bare silver look. The white really does give you a degree of improvement. The top's data panel is crisp and clear, as is the number above 45046. We've got some really good overhead warning flashes, again crisp and clear. The Royal Fusilier nameplate and logo do look really nice on the side here, but what's interesting is they do look quite different to the supplied etch details which come with this, and I can actually see that whilst I'm not normally a one for adding the nameplates on, in this instance I do feel that these look like they give a much better finish, and you can see there the idea would be to build them up, but it does look on that like there's nothing printed on that. So I'm just looking to see if there's any transfers or anything to go on those. No, it does look as if the actual crests have not been fully finished. I would have expected some printing on there so that these could go on the body side and you just put the nameplates over the top. The nameplates themselves are actually really nicely finished, you can see there. But if you use the full board, we're going to lose that crest there, which is so nicely printed on the side of the model, but isn't replicated on the etched plates which come with this particular one. Now, I don't know if that's a quality control fail or whether they're all like that. Certainly, I'm going to just leave this as is, but you could see from these that the plates themselves should have a particular shape as detailed there, which the printing doesn't replicate, and that is something of a shame because I could see the benefits for having those etched plates, but for whatever reason I can't use them on this because they're missing that crest. The rest of the body side louvres are really good, again moulded, but give a good sense of the spacing and the bracing that actually goes on behind them, and that is a really great effect. Moving further down, more body side grills. Again, you can see that internal structure replicated, which is really good from a moulded on detail. And then we've got the cab doors, the BR double arrow. We've also got those treads on the cab. They do look quite good, and the door handle separately picked out. And then looking into the cab, it is a very basic cab, but it is there, and we do get a driver figure at the number 1 end. As far as I'm aware, there is no internal cab lighting on these, and that is pretty much the same as previous releases. The number 2 cab end does still have a cab interior, but no driver figure at all. Roof detail is pretty good. As we scroll down the locomotive, you can see all the detail is picked out where it needs to be, and we do have a roof fan underneath its grille. This is a non-working fan, but it sits over the top of where the speaker would go and does allow good egress of the sound. Windscreen wipers are nice slender etched pieces that are separately applied and do look good. And again, moving to the other end, we've got quite minimalist detail, correctly so, on this front end, and it is actually really nicely done. Looking to the demarcation between the blue and the yellow, I can still see a degree of bleed over where the masking hasn't quite been perfect around the detail, and that is a bit of a shame. Looking to the top-down profile of this, you can see that when I compare the new Class 45 with this 45, we've got the difference in the roof detail correctly represented, and again, as I said before, it looks really great how much detail differences Bachmann have tooled up for to be able to represent the different versions of the same class of locomotive. This here is the Class 46, and it appears to carry the same style of roof vents as the later Class 46 builds, here modelled by Bachmann. Running on DC, the locomotive was a faultless performer, and that's to be expected. I've found all of the peak locomotives from Bachmann, going way back to the early 8-pin chassis versions, to be a very sure-footed performer. You might be worried about having a drive only to 2 of the axles on each bogie, but believe me, this doesn't seem to affect its haulage capacity, and given the weight that this model comes in at, that this is a very sure-footed performer, and I'm not worried in the slightest about the drive not going to the 3rd axle on each bogie as per the prototype. Out of the box on DC, it ran perfectly well. I had no issues with it, even though Bachmann suggests a running-in period for new locomotives. I actually didn't find it was necessary with this. The mechanism was sweetly put together and worked first time every time. So we turn now to the Dcc fitting of this model, and this is really easy, which is another good plus point for the venerable Bachmann Peak. We recommend the use of the Train-O-Matic 21-pin decoder, and I've obtained this through Tramfabrique at the URL in the description box below, and if you go there you can get exactly the right decoder for your model. I'm going to be using a jeweler's screwdriver, smaller, crosshead design. And what we need to do is take the locomotive, move the bogies to one side, and we immediately see a hole there. Feel down into there with the jeweler's screwdriver, undo that screw. Again, for there. Make sure you don't lose these screws. Move the bogies right over the other direction, and you'll see 2 more screw holes. One thing to note is that there are an extra set of screws, and you don't need to undo these. You can see them there just near to the handrails underneath the bogie. There's one on either side and the same at the other end of the locomotive. Now it might be tempting to undo every screw that you can see, but actually these 4 screws hold the chassis together and are nothing to do with keeping the top on the locomotive, so there's no need to undo them. Now there are 2 more screws, and these are ones which can be quite easy to miss. Right up here at the nose, almost invisible, we have a tiny screw. Carefully undo that. I'm going to just use some tweezers to make sure it doesn't go missing. And these are a different size to all of the other ones that you take out. Again, at the other end, push the bogie all the way to one side to gain access. Once we've got those nose screws undone, it's simply a case of lifting out the chassis. Just to confirm, inside here we've got the light assembly front and back, but no cab lights. Inside the locomotive it's really easy to see the internal layout. We've got this big recess here which is designed for the speaker assembly, but if you're not going down a sound fitted route, this is a perfect location to put something like a smart power pack to ensure that the locomotive's performance is second to none. On the motherboard there you can see we have the attachments where you would solder a speaker to if you are putting a sound installation in, and we have the 21-pin header here supplied with a blanking plate in place. With the top off we can also see the cab interiors. They're a little bit Spartan, but actually they do the job. Through the windows you're not really going to see anything of the shortcomings, so they're not really too bad at all. To take off the blanking plate, grip it either side and just gently rock it. You may find it's easier to very carefully rest something like a flathead screwdriver on your thumb and then gently just ease it up, and then turn the locomotive around before you get it all the way off. And again, same on the other side. You need to be careful here, don't go gung-ho or you'll bend the pins. Let's just give that another wiggle. Gently rock it from side to side and lift upwards. This is important to avoid damaging the pin headers. We then get the Trainomatic 21-pin decoder. Make sure that it is aligned, and then with gentle pressure rock the decoder from side to side and gently push it all the way home. And there you have it. The decoder is in place. By default it's set to ID number 3. All we have to do then is take the body and refit it. The fan end goes over the top of where the speaker enclosure would be, and then we just slide it down into place, making sure that it's all the way down, and then it's simply a case of reinstalling all of the screws. And then very carefully reinsert the slender nose screws. You may find a pair of tweezers helps with getting these in the right place, and then very carefully tighten them down. Once you're happy that all is back in place, it's as simple as that. We can transfer the locomotive to the programming track, and then it's off to the layout to get this running on DCC. Performance on track was reasonably good, I have to say that I didn't experience any issues with that lack of pickups to the extra wheels, and certainly it doesn't appear that this model needs them in the slightest. It's also the case that it ran through even the most complicated of point work on Weir Yard without any hint of derailment, and when coupled up to a reasonably long train, it pulled it with the greatest of ease. There didn't seem to be too much compromise with losing a driven axle on each bogie, although it is something that I could see that the performance would be improved if they were to modify the chassis at some point in the future to incorporate that all main wheel drive. Lighting was fairly simplistic. We get direction controlled lights forwards and reverse. However, there is no means that I could find to turn off the red marker lights showing at the rear, which, unless this model was running as a light locomotive, it's something that you wouldn't see with a train behind it, and it is a shame that at the very least a switch couldn't be incorporated to the underside of the locomotive to be able to turn them off. There are no other lighting functions on this model. So we turn now to scores. First up is build quality, and certainly this feels a very reasonably well put together model. Nothing fell off during the course of the review, and it performed reliably with no issues showing to any great extent, so I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10, as it has to be said that there's not really too much in the way of separately applied detail, so whilst it is a robust model, it's not exactly taxed in this area. Next up is running quality. The model performed on the track pretty well. It could be said that it is compromised a little bit by a lack of pickups on those innermost wheels and a lack of drive to them as well, but actually for most users you're not really going to see any great problem from that. All in all, it performed pretty well, even going round some quite tight curves without any issues whatsoever, although it did look a little bit peculiar with the bogies swung right out, but I guess these were never designed in real life to go round corners anywhere near as tight, so that can be forgiven. I'm going to give this a 9.2. Next up is DCC Fitting and Innovation, and this, whilst having a 21-pin socket, is a very basic installation. There's no real control over the lights. You can either have the direction controlled lights on, and if you do, the red marker lights always come on at the other end, regardless, or you can have them off. There's no switch to be able to remove those red marker lights, for example, if the locomotive's going to be pulling a train. There's no independent cab lights, and certainly it did feel that this was a basic model with a more modern decoder socket added in almost as an afterthought. There is space for a pretty reasonable speaker, it has to be said, and if you're not going down a sound fitted route, it gives you ample space for the largest of smart power packs, so that is pretty good. But all in all, I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. On accuracy and quality of finish, there were a few areas where I just felt there was problems with the finish on the model. Accuracy per se seems pretty good, but that slight fuzziness around the yellow on the ends of the bonnets did draw the eye. I also found that the separately applied etched plates, whilst it's a great addition to find these in the packaging for the model to be applied by the user if they so wish, I was very surprised to see that the backing plates did not include the crest, and that rather negated their whole purpose. I'm inclined to think that this is a quality control issue, but I have to review these as I find them, and it was missing, so it does get marked down on that. I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. When it comes to value for money, I was a little bit disappointed. Not totally. The price tag I could find these at is just under £140 discounted. It still is a good model for its age, but it's older tooling, and in particular it does lack a lot of the DCC features. The fuzziness on some of the printing as well just felt to me like a little bit more care could have been taken in the factory on this, but they are to some extent minor gripes. But I'm going to give this a 7.4, and that gives us a total score of 39.6. We do have an affiliate link in the description box down below to help you find these models, and certainly I do feel sometimes like I'm being a little bit picky. It is a great model and I am still really happy to add it to my collection. There is no buyer's remorse, and the little foibles that it does have, they aren't so major as to ruin the model. They're things that are there that I point out, and I am aware of them. But from most viewing angles, to be perfectly honest, this is still a perfectly acceptable model. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video and found it informative, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments section down below. Do you agree with my findings, or is this something that maybe you've got a perfect example and you just want to let other people know that maybe some of the little faults that I picked up on were just quality control issues rather than representative of the full production run? And of course, if you really like today's model, we've got an affiliate link down below to take you to where you can pick one up for yourself. You can also leave a super thanks if you wish to support the channel. It's a really great way of helping us to continue to make the videos that you want to see, and also a lasting legacy of your great support to this channel. For your comment stays there for all to see, your generosity. Don't forget as well to tickle that like button, share this video, and also subscribe to the channel to be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. You can also head on over to Patreon and check us out with our tiers of special benefits, as well as early access to the Friday video, as a great big thank you for your continuing support to make these videos possible. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. Until next time, take care. Happy modelling, and bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. Additional support for today's video comes to you in association with TMC, the Model Centre. Check them out at the URL link in the description down below for a fully stocked and comprehensive website that covers products from a whole host of different manufacturers. They're also home to the unique custom weathering service for that bespoke finish that cannot be rivaled, and indeed also that custom graffiti that gives your wagons that personal touch. You can also visit them in their North Yorkshire showroom for a fully stocked and friendly visit. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N. from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, NI Railways 4000 class, Ian Coulson, Alan Dickerson, Eddie Papere, Karen Nichol, Medwin Williams, Crossways Point Junction, 3B Rail, and Jennifer Garrett. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.